Dale Peterson looked up from his desk, a knowing smirk twisting his lips as I walked in. He knew I knew. "Susie said you'd be stopping by," he drawled, pushing a file away. My stomach churned, the world suddenly off kilter. "You're still young, Frank. You need a reliable man," he added, his eyes full of triumph. The hum of the fluorescent lights in Dale Peterson's office felt too loud. I stood just inside the doorway, the oak paneling and framed photos of Dale shaking hands with various local dignitaries doing little to soften the space. My fists were clenched, the knuckles white against my tan work pants. Dale sat behind his polished cherry desk, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing thick forearms. He looked up, his lips twisting into the smug smirk that had become so familiar over the past few weeks, though it had never been directed at me quite like this before. The look confirmed everything my gut had been telling me about him and Susie. Every late night, every canceled plan, every distant stare from her. It all coalesced into this one cold, undeniable truth. "How's my wife, Dale?" My voice came out tighter than I intended, a thin, strained wire. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. My chest felt hollow, a drum beaten from the inside. He leaned back in his leather chair, the smirk still playing on his face like a cat watching a mouse trapped in a corner. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he just held my gaze, his eyes sharp and unblinking. It was a challenge, a declaration. And in that moment, standing in his office, the anger that had been simmering for days crystallized into something far colder. This wasn't just about rage anymore. This was a hard, quiet resolve. A decision had been made, not in a rush of blood, but in the steady beat of a heart that now felt like granite. Something would have to be done. A few weeks back, Dale had made a passing comment about Clarence Dobbs, something about the old man getting into trouble again, but nothing serious. It hadn't registered much at the time, just idle office gossip. But now Clarence's name echoed in my mind, a faint but persistent bell. Clarence. He was a fixture in Prairie Creek, one of the lost souls who drifted through the town's periphery. 60-odd years old, a lifetime of hard living etched into his face, he mostly lived on the streets, always searching for a warm corner when the winter wind bit hard. I remembered Clarence from my old days on the force, before I traded in the uniform for the relative predictability of the county clerk's office. There was one particularly brutal January night, the kind where the air itself felt like it would shatter. I found Clarence huddled under the awning of the old feed store, nearly frozen solid. He was drunk, of course, but mostly just cold and lost. I arrested him not for any crime, but to get him off the street. It was a common practice for us then, a way to keep the truly vulnerable from dying of exposure. I remember the look in his eyes when I cuffed him, not anger, just a deep, bone-weary resignation. He didn't fight, didn't even argue. At the station, after I got him settled in a cell, he'd simply asked if he could keep the scratchy wool blanket and the flat pillow I'd given him. "It's been a while, Sheriff," he'd mumbled, his voice thick with a Georgia accent that had somehow survived decades in the Midwest. I'd made sure he had a warm meal and a bed for the night. The next morning, I spoke with Calvin Hayes, the head jailer, a man who understood the unwritten rules of our small town. Then I called Judge Harrison, a pragmatic man who knew the difference between a vagrant and a menace. No charges were filed. Clarence was released with a stern warning and the promise of a hot cup of coffee from the diner down the street. It was just how things worked in Prairie Creek sometimes. Now that memory, that connection to Clarence, felt like a small, unexpected flicker of light in the dimness. I left Dale's office, the fluorescent hum fading behind me, and got into my Chevy pickup. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty streets of Prairie Creek. I drove slowly, my eyes scanning the usual spots, behind the hardware store near the deserted loading docks of the old brewery, the bus stop at the edge of town. These were Clarence's haunts, places where he might find a sliver of shelter from the world. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of a cold night. I passed the grain elevators, their tall forms silhouetted against the pale sky, then turned on to Taylor Street. And there he was, a stooped figure in an oversized coat, shuffling along the sidewalk near the YMCA. His head was down, his shoulders hunched against the invisible weight of the day. I pulled the truck over, tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, and cut the engine. Clarence, I called out, my voice carrying in the quiet street. He flinched, his head snapping up, his eyes, wary and bloodshot, fixed on me. I got out of the truck and walked towards him, a purposeful stride that I hope conveyed reassurance, not threat. "Afternoon, Sheriff," he said, his voice raspy, already sounding a little defensive. He still called me Sheriff, even after all these years. "It's okay, Clarence. You're not in trouble," I said, raising my hand slightly to show I meant no harm. "Just want to chat for a minute." He paused, studying me, his old eyes trying to read something in my face. Then he nodded slowly. "Can we go somewheres warm?" he asked, his accent thick around the edges. "This wind cuts right through." Dot's Diner had been a fixture in Prairie Creek for over 60 years, a bastion of Formica countertops and chipped ceramic mugs. The air inside smelled of fried onions, weak coffee, and a faint, comforting trace of old grease. We slid into a red vinyl booth near the back, away from the midday rush. The unseasonably cold November air outside had left a chill in our bones. I nodded at Dot herself, a woman whose smile lines were as deep as the Grand Canyon, as she came to take our order. "Coffee, black," I told her. Clarence looked up from the plastic-covered menu, his eyes still a little wary but already softening in the warmth. "Can I get one of them hot chocolates, ma'am?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "And maybe a soup?" "You order whatever you like, Clarence," I said, catching his eye. "Don't hold back." I declined food for myself. My stomach felt too knotted for anything substantial. Dot scribbled on her pad, her pencil scratching. Clarence took a deeper breath, scanning the menu again, perhaps not used to such an open invitation. "Chicken noodle soup, then," he decided, "and the pork tenderloin sandwich, with fries and a large cola." Dot nodded, her gaze briefly flicking to me, then back to Clarence. "Anything else, hun?" He hesitated, then asked almost shyly, "Is there dessert too?" "Of course there's dessert," I answered for Dot, who was already turning towards the kitchen. "Anything you want." Clarence gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a flicker of something like gratitude in his tired eyes. When Dot had gone, leaving the clatter of the kitchen to fill the quiet, I leaned forward slightly. "Clarence," I began, keeping my voice low, "do you know why we're talking today?" He picked at a loose thread on the edge of the vinyl seat, avoiding my gaze. The smell of his coat, a mix of damp wool and wood smoke, hung in the air between us. He swallowed hard. "Because you might be in some trouble, Sheriff," he replied softly, his eyes still fixed on the thread. "With Sheriff Larson." I straightened, the unexpected directness of his answer hitting me. The casual way he delivered it, as if it were common knowledge. My arm. "Trouble?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Who told you that, Clarence?" He finally looked at me, his eyes wide and a little fearful. "Sheriff Larson himself," he mumbled. "He picked me up a few days ago, said you were causing him problems. Said you were in trouble over that old arrest of mine, and some other things. Said if I saw you, I was to tell you that, and that I had to do what someone said and repeat what I was told." Clarence's words came out in a rush, a garbled confession of fear and simple obedience. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the napkin holder. A cold dread spread through me. Larson using Clarence like this. It was calculated, manipulative. "Did he offer you anything, Clarence?" I pressed. "Money? A place to stay? Anything for repeating what you were told?" Clarence shook his head, the movement slow and sad. "No, no one has ever helped me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked directly at me then, and there was a raw honesty in his gaze that cut through the noise of the diner. "The only person who ever tried to help me was you." A small, grim smile touched my lips. Amidst the rising tide of anger, that simple statement, that clear perception from a man the world had mostly forgotten, felt like a small anchor. He saw things for what they were, stripped of pretense. The food arrived, a steaming bowl of soup, a generous pork tenderloin, and a mountain of fries. Clarence ate quietly, methodically, savoring each bite. He dipped his fries into the small plastic cup of ketchup with precision, his movements slow and deliberate. I watched him, the steam from my coffee warming my face, and thought about how to help him genuinely, not just for my own ends, but for his. Larson had used him. I didn't want to be like Larson. When he finished wiping his mouth with a napkin, he looked up, a faint sheen of satisfaction on his face. That was good, Sheriff. Real good. Glad to hear it, I said. What about that dessert? He ordered the apple pie with 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream and another hot chocolate. While he ate, I asked Dot to make up a ham and cheese sandwich and grab a bag of chips for him to take with him. Something for later. The sun was sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays when we finally left Dot's diner. Clarence clutched the takeout bag, his face still etched with the memory of Larson's words, but a little fuller, a little warmer. You want to ride to the shelter, Clarence? I asked, gesturing to my truck. It'll be cold tonight. He hesitated, looking at the setting sun, then at the bag in his hand. No, Sheriff, I'm okay. I got my own way. Thanks for the food, it means a lot. His refusal was polite but firm. He was scared, I knew, but his freedom, however meager, was something he wouldn't easily give up. He nodded once, a quick, almost imperceptible gesture, and shuffled off into the deepening twilight, a solitary figure against the encroaching cold. The drive back to the hotel felt longer than it was, the headlights cutting weak paths through the gathering darkness. My mind churned over Clarence's words, his simple honesty. His life had been a series of hard knocks. Kicked out of high school for fighting, no family to speak of, a revolving door of temporary jobs, then the streets, the jail cells, the cold nights. I remembered a conversation from years ago, him muttering something about the jungle and never being right after that. His age, his quiet demeanor, the way his eyes still held a distant flicker of trauma, it all clicked. Clarence Dobbs was a Vietnam veteran. The jungle. The phrase hung in the stale air of my pickup. He wasn't just a transient. He was a soldier who'd come home to nothing. This realization sharpened my resolve. First thing in the morning, I'd call the Maple County Veterans Affairs Office. Darlene Jenkins ran that office, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for getting things done for her veterans. If anyone could help Clarence, it was Darlene. That night, alone in the sterile hotel room, I called a few friends, making sure to drop casual mentions of the conference I was supposedly attending out of town. The conversations were brief, full of the usual pleasantries. No one mentioned Susie, no one hinted at anything amiss. That was good. It meant she hadn't spread the news of her affair. Not yet. Perhaps she was still trying to figure things out. Or perhaps she just didn't want the small-town gossip mill grinding her name to dust. I finished a bottle of indifferent motel wine, the cheap Cabernet doing little to dull the edges of my thoughts, yet surprisingly, sleep came easily. My mind, usually racing, found a quiet focus in the plan I was forming for Clarence. The world had dealt him a bad hand, and now maybe I could help him find a winning one. I woke with a dull headache, a metallic taste in my mouth, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Today I would start taking charge, and it would begin with Clarence. I was at the Maple County Veterans Affairs Office by 8 a.m., just as Darlene Jenkins was pulling her sensible sedan into a parking spot. She was a woman in her late 50s, with short, practical hair and an air of quiet efficiency. Frank Miller, I said, stepping up to her as she locked her car. Good morning, Darlene. She looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, and then a slight smile. Frank, it's been a while. What brings you to this neck of the woods so early? I need to talk to you about Clarence Dobbs, I replied, cutting straight to it. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of sharp interest. Clarence Dobbs? Come in, Frank. Right now. She led me through the quiet office, past rows of empty desks, to her small, cluttered office. Papers were stacked high on every surface, but everything seemed to have its place. She motioned me to a visitor's chair, pulling her own up to her desk. I have been trying to find Clarence for years, she said, her voice tight with a mix of frustration and urgency. He's like a ghost, comes and goes. The last I heard, he was back out on the streets in Prairie Creek. She leaned forward, her eyes bright. I actually have a pending disability compensation and pension claim for him. My pulse quickened. And? She nodded, a rare, genuine smile breaking through her serious demeanor. It finally went through. He's been approved for full benefits. Full benefits? I asked, a sense of relief washing over me, unexpected and profound. 100%, she confirmed. Purple Heart recipient, served in Nam, severe PTSD, Agent Orange exposure, and injuries sustained in combat. The paperwork has been a nightmare, going back almost 10 years. But it's done. She pushed a thick file across the desk, its contents a jumble of official forms and medical reports. What does that mean for him? I asked, my mind already racing, calculating. It means a lot, Frank, she said, tapping a pen on the file. First, he's due back payments for 1 year. His claim was so old, they had to go back and recalculate. We're looking at around $36,000 in a lump sum. $36,000. My breath caught. That was life-changing money for someone like Clarence. And going forward, Darlene continued, he'll receive about $3,000 a month in disability pension, plus full VA medical benefits, dental, everything. He won't have to worry about a thing ever again. I stared at the file, at the words Purple Heart and 100% disability, and a vision of Clarence, stooped and wary, walking away into the twilight, flashed in my mind. This wasn't just money. This was a secure future. A home, warmth, food, medical care. This was a chance for him to escape the streets, to escape the kind of manipulation Dale Larson had attempted. And housing? I asked, thinking of the cold nights. The VA, in conjunction with the American Legion, will help him find a safe, comfortable home, Darlene assured me. He won't just get the money. We'll make sure he has support. A new life, Frank. I left Darlene's office nearly an hour later, the early morning chill having given way to a weak but determined sun. The air felt crisper, the world sharper. A profound sense of purpose, almost a thrill, hummed beneath my skin. This wasn't just about my revenge against Dale. It was about something far more significant, something genuinely good. Clarence's future, a life salvaged, offered a peculiar satisfaction I hadn't felt in a long time. I spent the next 2 hours systematically searching for Clarence. My first stop was the YMCA, but no one had seen him. Then I checked the library, the park benches, and the usual alleys behind the downtown businesses. Finally, I found him at the Salvation Army's Adult Day Care Center, nestled in a worn armchair, a styrofoam cup of coffee clutched in his hands, soaking up the warmth. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly when he saw me. Clarence, I said, my voice gentle but firm, we need to go. He frowned, a deep crease appearing between his bushy eyebrows. Go where, Sheriff? To Darlene Jenkins' office, the VA office. It's important, life-changing important. I tried everything, persuasion, gentle urging, the promise of more food. He was wary, his freedom a precious, fragile thing he guarded fiercely. He didn't want to be forced, didn't want to be told what to do. I had to convince him this was different, that this was for him, not for me, not for the system. It took time, almost an hour of patient explanation, repeating Darlene's words, emphasizing the benefits. He watched my face, trying to discern the truth in my eyes. Finally, just before noon, I managed to get him into my truck. He sat stiffly in the passenger seat, clutching his coffee cup, his eyes still darting nervously around. We arrived at Darlene's office, and she greeted him with the calm authority of someone who had dealt with thousands like him. Clarence Dobbs, she said, extending her hand. It's good to finally meet you. I'm Darlene Jenkins. Clarence, to my surprise, took her hand, a small, uncertain gesture. Darlene immediately cleared her afternoon appointments. The next few hours were a whirlwind of paperwork, explanations, and quiet triumphs. They sorted out his medical care, his health benefits. Darlene explained the disability pension, the back pay, the prospect of a stable income. Clarence listened, his face slowly losing its habitual caution, replaced by a kind of bewildered hope. They even set up a bank account for him. By late afternoon, a comfortable one-bedroom apartment near the local bus route was arranged for him, ready by the end of the week. Darlene also organized a comprehensive battery of medical exams for him at the VA hospital in Minneapolis. Dental, vision, a full physical, mental health evaluation. She made sure to explain everything slowly, clearly, patiently, ensuring Clarence understood he wouldn't be alone. I can drive him, I offered, cutting in, to Minneapolis for his appointments. Darlene nodded, a grateful look in her eyes. It was the least I could do. We stayed with Clarence into the evening, making sure he was settled back at the local shelter, a new sense of purpose in his step, until his apartment was ready. He had his takeout bag from Dots, a fresh change of clothes from the shelter, and a glimmer of hope in his eyes I hadn't seen before. As I walked back to my truck, the cold evening air biting, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Several missed calls, all from Dale Peterson. A cold smile touched my lips. He had called. He was curious. He was wondering where I was. I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and then deliberately called him back. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and immediately betraying his impatience. "Frank, where the hell have you been? Are you planning on coming into work again? Or are you just going to disappear?" His tone, the possessive edge to his question, solidified my resolve. My plan for revenge, for dismantling his power, for exposing his true nature, had been set in motion. This strategic move with Clarence, a small act of unexpected kindness, was merely the first quiet step. My absence from the county clerk's office became fodder for the Prairie Creek gossip mill. I knew Dale was fanning the flames, dropping hints about my erratic behavior and unexplained disappearances. Sheriff Larson, ever attuned to the shifting winds of local power, started a quiet investigation into my activities, spurred on by Dale's veiled suggestions. He called me in for a chat, a friendly warning cloaked in official concern. I played it cool, brushed off the rumors, and assured him everything was fine. He watched me with those knowing eyes, but I offered nothing. Susie, meanwhile, became increasingly concerned. "What's with you and Clarence Dobbs all of a sudden?" she'd asked one evening, her voice laced with suspicion, her eyes searching my face. We were sitting at that kitchen table, the silence between us heavy, punctuated by the hum of the refrigerator. "You never cared about him before. What's your angle, Frank?" I kept my voice even, my expression unreadable. "No angle, Susie, just trying to help an old acquaintance get back on his feet. The man's a veteran, deserves a fair shake." I poured myself another glass of water, avoiding her gaze. She was smart, though. She sensed there was more, a hidden current beneath my calm surface. Clarence, thankfully, was settling into his new apartment, a small, clean space that offered him a stability he hadn't known in decades. Darlene Jenkins kept me updated with brief, efficient emails and calls. "Clarence is doing well," she'd say. "Doctor's appointments are on track. He even asked for a library card." Each update, each small detail of Clarence's burgeoning new life inadvertently strengthened my moral standing, solidifying my purpose. It wasn't just about my hurt anymore. It was about exposing Dale for the snake he was, a man who would use even the most vulnerable for his own gain. My days were now consumed with a different kind of work. I began discreetly gathering information on Dale's professional vulnerabilities and personal secrets. He was the golden boy of Prairie Creek, on the fast track to bigger things, but everyone had cracks in their foundation. I revisited old contacts from my police days, men and women who had seen the underbelly of our quiet town. I met them for coffee, for a beer, never directly asking about Dale, but subtly probing, listening to the murmurs and whispers. Any dirt on Dale, or even Sheriff Larson, was fair game. "You're playing with fire, Frank," one former colleague, a retired detective named George, warned me over lukewarm coffee at the Quick Mart. He had seen too much, knew too much. "Dale's got connections, deep ones. He's been cultivating them for years. Mayor, council members, even some folks in the state capitol. He's got his fingers in a lot of pies." That conversation confirmed what I already suspected. Dale's betrayal wasn't just about Susie. It ran deeper, touching the very fabric of Prairie Creek, its contracts, its resources, its political landscape. He wasn't just a home wrecker. He was a town wrecker, a parasite. One afternoon, while volunteering a few hours at the county archives, a place where Dale had once sent me on a frivolous errand, I overheard a hushed conversation between two minor council members. They spoke in coded language about the Peterson deal and rezoning and commissions. Nothing concrete, but enough to prick my ears. It hinted at Dale's involvement in questionable dealings, a pattern of manipulation that went beyond office politics. Susie, meanwhile, grew more distant. She still lived in our house, but her presence was a phantom. She sensed my hidden agenda, the coiled tension beneath my calm exterior, but she couldn't articulate it. She would watch me, her eyes clouded, her lips pressed into a thin line. The gulf between us widened with each passing day. My focus had shifted. This was no longer just about personal revenge for a broken marriage. It was about dismantling Dale's entire deceptive facade, pulling back the curtain on the man who had been slowly corrupting our town from the inside out. I started looking harder, digging deeper, and then I found it. Evidence. Not just whispers, but documents, invoices, meeting minutes, anonymous tips I'd once dismissed. Dale had been manipulating town resources, siphoning off funds from public contracts, and ensuring his cronies always got the best deals. This revelation solidified my resolve. Dale wouldn't just pay for the affair, he would pay for everything. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The air in my hotel room grew heavy with the smell of stale coffee and printer ink. Spread across the desk were documents, spreadsheets, and handwritten notes. My meticulous record of Dale's financial irregularities and professional misconduct. Each entry, each cross-referenced detail, painted a clearer picture of his corruption. It was clear now, Sheriff Larson's earlier intimidation of Clarence had been orchestrated by Dale, a petty, calculated move to undermine me, to make me seem unstable and unreliable. It was a preemptive strike, meant to discredit me before I even knew what I was fighting. My plan was precise. Expose Dale's rot without directly implicating myself. I knew the system. I knew how small towns protected their own, how quickly the blame could shift. I needed a catalyst. I found it in Sarah Jenkins, a seasoned journalist at the Prairie Creek Gazette. She had a reputation for integrity, a quiet tenacity that could dig beneath the surface of official statements. I left an anonymous envelope in her mailbox, filled with just enough information to pique her interest, enough to make her start asking questions. Meanwhile, Clarence, safe in his new apartment, began to recall details. Over coffee with Darlene or during our check-ins, he'd mention things. Saw Dale Peterson sometimes, late at night, always with that big man from the construction company, Mr. Henderson. Or they'd meet at the old warehouse, not the office. Looked like they didn't want to be seen. These were fragments, but they were invaluable, adding human color to the dry figures in my files. One evening, I returned to the house to find Susie waiting for me, her face pale, her hands trembling. She held a crumpled note, one of my investigation drafts that I must have carelessly left out. My heart sank. "What are you doing, Frank?" she asked, her voice a reedy whisper. "What's this all really about?" Her eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with fear, not for herself, but for what I was uncovering, for what it might mean for both of us. I looked at her, my face stone-faced, allowing no emotion to break through. "Justice," I said, the word hanging heavy in the air between us. It was all I offered. Across town, Dale Peterson, feeling the first subtle tremors of an impending earthquake, began to grow agitated. His usual smug confidence started to fray. He became paranoid, his movements less calculated, more reckless. I heard whispers from former colleagues. Dale was snapping at staff, missing appointments, making careless mistakes in paperwork. He knew something was coming, but he didn't know from where. Then Sarah Jenkins' first article hit the Prairie Creek Gazette. It was subtle, a column asking pointed questions about the funding for the new town park and the recent bids for the water main project. No accusations, just questions, carefully phrased, but they were enough. The old-timers in town, the ones who had seen generations of corruption, started nodding their heads. I made my next move, an anonymous tip to the state auditing office. I painted a vague but compelling picture of financial irregularities in Maple County, suggesting they might want to take a closer look at certain contracts approved by the county clerk's office. The seed was planted. Sheriff Larson, who had always been a man of careful allegiances, found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. The pressure from Dale was surely mounting, but now the public scrutiny, fueled by Sarah Jenkins's articles, was a different kind of beast. He was caught in the middle, his loyalty tested. I realized then how deep Dale's secrets went. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous the game became. Dale wouldn't just roll over. He had too much to lose. My protection of Clarence became paramount. I reiterated to him, through Darlene, that he should speak only to us, that he was safe, and that his information was valuable. His testimony, if needed, would be crucial. The town council, rattled by the Gazette's articles and the growing murmur among constituents, called a tense public meeting to address the financial concerns. The community hall was packed, simmering with unspoken questions. I sat in the back, a silent observer, watching Dale, his face strained, and Sheriff Larson, whose usual easygoing demeanor had been replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. The rot was beginning to surface. The Tuesday edition of the Prairie Creek Gazette hit doorsteps like a thunderclap. The headline screamed, not in sensationalist italics, but in stark, bold print. County clerk linked to local corruption, embezzlement. Sarah Jenkins had done her work, weaving together the facts, the rumors, and the carefully placed hints into a damning narrative. Shockwaves rippled through Prairie Creek. No one had expected the golden boy, Dale Peterson, to fall so hard, so publicly. Susie was devastated. I saw it in her eyes, not just the shame of Dale's public downfall, but the raw pain of seeing the cold, precise calculation of my actions. She knew it was me, even without proof. She saw the architect of Dale's destruction sitting across the breakfast table, quiet and unmoving. Sheriff Larson, caught between a rock and a hard place, had no choice but to open a formal investigation. The heat from the state capitol was too intense, the public outcry too loud. His own career, carefully cultivated over decades, was suddenly on the line. He knew if he didn't act, he'd be dragged down too. Clarence Dobbs's testimony, given with a newfound clarity and courage, became crucial. His memories of late-night meetings, of suspicious figures and hushed conversations, corroborated my meticulous evidence of manipulated contracts and siphoned funds. "Clarence has found his voice, Frank," Darlene Jenkins said to me one afternoon, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "You gave him that." I only nodded, the words stirring a complex mix of satisfaction and something akin to unease within me. The confrontation with Dale was inevitable. It happened in the empty hallway of the county courthouse, after one of his initial hearings. He cornered me, his face red and contorted, his voice a low, furious hiss. "You ruined my life, Frank. Everything I worked for, gone. You did this." I looked at him, my expression unyielding. His accusations slid off me like water. "You ruined your own life, Dale," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "When you thought you could take everything, my wife, my reputation, this town's money. You made your choices." I walked away, leaving him standing there, sputtering in impotent rage. The state auditor's office descended on Maple County like a swarm of locusts. Every ledger, every receipt, every contract was scrutinized. The county building buzzed with a frantic energy as employees scrambled to cooperate or to cover their tracks. The rot was exposed piece by piece. Public opinion in Prairie Creek, initially stunned, now turned sharply against Dale. The town, protective of its image, felt betrayed. Whispers of his arrogance, his ruthlessness became public pronouncements. And strangely, in the vacuum left by his fall, a quiet current of support for me began to emerge. The town saw me not just as a wronged husband, but as someone who had stood up to power, who had brought truth to light. But in my own home, the silence grew colder. Susie left me a week after Dale's charges were formally announced. A note on the kitchen counter, brief and to the point. She couldn't reconcile the man she thought she loved with the vengeful architect of Dale's destruction. She recognized the justice in my actions, perhaps, but she couldn't live with the coldness that had driven them. She was gone. A pang of regret, sharp and sudden, pierced through me. It was a fleeting moment of weakness, quickly pushed down. My mission was not yet complete, and personal feelings had no place in the endgame. Finally, the hammer fell. Dale Peterson was formally charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power. The news played on every local channel. Pictures of him, grim-faced, walking into the courthouse, flashed across screens. Sheriff Larson, though he managed to avoid direct charges, was publicly censured for negligence and for his questionable initial handling of the case. He lost significant standing in the community, his political aspirations effectively dead. The climax. Dale's public fall from grace was complete, a direct result of my meticulous planning and quiet vengeance. I watched the news reports from my quiet home, the familiar furniture now feeling foreign and empty. The victory was mine, undeniably mine, but it tasted hollow, like ash in my mouth. The trial of Dale Peterson consumed Prairie Creek. It was the biggest scandal the small town had seen in decades, eclipsing all previous gossip, all past dramas. Every morning the courthouse was packed, a morbid curiosity drawing townspeople to witness the downfall of one of their own. The air inside the courtroom was thick with unspoken tension, the sterile drone of legal proceedings unable to mask the raw emotions simmering beneath the surface. I was called to testify, my composure unyielding. My testimony was clinical, factual, a precise recitation of dates, documents, and observed patterns. Each word I uttered was a nail in Dale's coffin, devoid of emotion, yet utterly damning. I watched Dale from the stand, his face pale and drawn, his usual arrogance replaced by a haunted desperation. He barely met my gaze. Clarence Dobbs, no longer the shuffling, wary man I'd first encountered, delivered a powerful testimony. Guided by Darlene, he spoke with an articulate confidence I wouldn't have thought possible. He recounted Dale's intimidation, Sheriff Larson's threats, the fear of losing his meager existence. His words, simple and direct, resonated in the hushed courtroom, exposing the petty cruelty Dale had inflicted upon him. Susie appeared briefly, called by the prosecution. She sat in the witness box, her face etched with a pain that was palpable even from the back of the room. She kept her eyes fixed on the judge, never once looking at me. Our shared history, the life we had built, felt like a distant echo in that cold room. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Dale Peterson was found guilty on multiple counts: embezzlement, fraud, abuse of power. The judge's pronouncement was firm, his voice devoid of sympathy. Dale faced a significant prison sentence, his political career, his very future, irrevocably destroyed. When the verdict came down, I felt no elation, no triumphant surge, only a profound exhaustion, bone deep and pervasive. The cold realization of what I had lost, what I had sacrificed, settled over me. Justice had a price, all right, and I was still paying for it, every damn day. Slowly, painfully, the town began to heal. New leadership emerged in the county clerk's office, eager to rebuild trust. A sense of collective relief, mixed with a lingering shame, settled over Prairie Creek. The scandal would be talked about for years, but the immediate crisis had passed. I attempted to reach out to Susie, a few texts, a couple of unanswered phone calls. Her silence was absolute, a stark wall between us. The life we had was truly over. Darlene Jenkins congratulated me, her voice gentle, her eyes filled with understanding. "You did a good thing for Clarence, Frank," she said, but her gaze lingered on my face. "But it took a toll on you, didn't it?" I didn't answer, just nodded, the truth of her words weighing heavily on me. I visited Clarence in his new apartment. It was small but clean and warm, filled with a few carefully chosen pieces of furniture. He had even started a small garden on his balcony, pots of herbs and a few straggly flowers. He looked at peace, a quiet contentment in his eyes that had never been there before. This, I realized, was the one pure, undeniable outcome of my actions. "Thank you, Sheriff," he said, his voice soft as he poured me a cup of instant coffee, "for everything." His simple, heartfelt thanks momentarily eased the heavy burden on my shoulders, a brief respite from the relentless self-interrogation. I sat there sipping the bitter coffee, reflecting on the morality of my actions. Was the vengeance, however righteous, worth the personal cost? The destruction of my marriage, the emotional wreckage, the coldness that had settled in my own heart? The town was changed, yes. Dale was gone. Clarence was safe. But I was changed too. The thought of leaving Prairie Creek, a town now irrevocably altered by my intervention, began to take root. This wasn't my home anymore, not in the same way. The weight of my decisions, of every calculated step, every sacrifice settled heavily upon me. It was a silent, internal reckoning, a solitary accounting of a justice that had taken as much as it had given. Months bled into one another, the seasons turning over Prairie Creek like pages in a well-worn book. I remained a quiet, solitary figure, an indelible part of the landscape yet distinct from it. The county clerk's office, with its bitter memories, was behind me. I took a low-profile job at the local feed store, hauling sacks of grain, mending fences, the simple physicality of the work a welcome balm. There was a rhythm to it, a tangible sense of production, far removed from the tangled web of small-town politics and betrayal. Clarence Dobbs, however, thrived. His apartment became a refuge, his health slowly improving. He started volunteering at the library, his slow, deliberate pace perfect for shelving books. He joined a small veteran support group and even started a tiny community garden plot at the edge of town, sharing his produce with his neighbors. He was no longer just a transient figure. He was an active, respected member of the community, a living testament to the ripple effect of a single act of unexpected kindness. News eventually reached me that Susie had moved out of Maple County, starting fresh somewhere new. There was no bitterness, just a quiet resignation. Her departure felt like the closing of a door I hadn't realized was still ajar. Sometimes I'd see Sheriff Larson around town. He was a humbled, quieter man now, his easy confidence replaced by a more subdued demeanor. We rarely spoke, but a subtle acknowledgement, a shared glance would pass between us. He understood. He'd paid his own price. Then a letter arrived, the envelope thick, the return address marked with the name of the state correctional facility. It was from Dale Peterson. His handwriting, once so bold and self-assured, was cramped and shaky. The letter was a strange mix of bitterness and a desperate, almost pathetic plea for understanding. He railed against the unfairness of it all, against the small-town politics, but buried within the anger was a fragile thread of regret, not for his actions, but for getting caught, for losing everything. I read it once, then folded it neatly, placing it back in its envelope. Some things you just can't undo. Some prices you just keep on paying. I dedicated more time to quiet contemplation, finding solace in the rhythms of everyday life here in the Midwest. The vastness of the prairie, the predictable turn of the seasons, offered a kind of austere peace. I started volunteering for local causes, helping out at the food bank, painting fences for elderly neighbors. It was a way to channel the fierce drive that had once fueled my vengeance into building something, into repairing, rather than dismantling. I learned to live with the ghosts of my past, the sharp sting of betrayal, the cold satisfaction of revenge, the hollow ache of personal sacrifices. They were part of me now, like the deep furrows in a winter field, etched into the landscape of my being. The sun was setting, a bruised purple and orange bleeding across the sky, as I stood alone on the edge of the sprawling prairie, watching a distant storm roll in. The wind, carrying the scent of rain, whipped around me. I accepted it then, truly, deeply. While Dale had indeed paid the price for his infidelity and his corruption, losing everything he had built on lies, I too had paid a heavy price for my revenge. It was a silent, personal cost, measured not in prison time or lost reputation, but in the quiet solitude that now defined my days, the loss of a life I could never reclaim. The story didn't end with a triumphant cheer, but with a quiet acceptance of consequences. The enduring human spirit, I realized, was not about escaping pain, but about learning to carry it, to live alongside it. I was a man irrevocably changed, carrying the scars of my choices, a testament to the fact that some wounds never truly heal. They only scar over. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a long, solitary shadow behind me, a silent symbol of the lonely path of justice and its inevitable aftermath.